class, we discussed about the superheating of refrigerant vapor entering into compressor and what are the different reasons for that, and uh, what is the effect on the COP, right? So it is concluded that in almost all practical applications, the refrigerant entering into compressor is superheated, and you cannot avoid it. But then you should not be very careless in allowing the superheating to occur due to unnecessary reasons, because it reduces the COP. Uh, Now, the second deviation that you find for in practical vapor compression refrigeration system as compared to the standard or the ideal one is that the liquid refrigerant which is coming out of the condenser or before it enters into the throttling device is most of the times subcooled. It is subcooled. It means that it fully condenses in the condenser, and then there is some additional cooling, because of which, as of now, let's assume that the pressure remains constant, but the temperature goes down further below the saturation temperature, and that is what is subcooling. And the after that it enters into the throttling device. Okay. Now, subcooling is always desirable if it can be achieved, or higher it you can achieve it, better it is. But then there is a limit uh, to which you can subcool the liquid, because like you have to go on increasing the heat exchanger size if you want to get more and more subcooling. And second, the cooling media itself, there is a temperature of that, and you cannot never go below that, or you cannot even achieve that temperature, right? There is always has to be a temperature difference, and only then there will be a heat transfer. But whatever is possible, one should try and achieve. And the reason is that it's going to, as it was shown from the chart, that like instead of 3 4, if you subcool it, it will, that line, assuming that the pressure remains constant, runs very close to the saturated liquid line, and it will come out at 3 dash, right? And this is delta T subcooling. And after that, if you expand it, what you see is that the dryness fraction at 0.4 dash is lower than the dryness fraction at 0.4. So because of that, in the same cycle, you get additional cooling effect. You get the additional cooling effect. And because of that, the COP of the cycle will be higher. The COP of the cycle will be higher because ideally the compressor work is not affected, and your cooling effect has increased. So because of that, obviously the COP will increase. And another useful thing that you achieve by subcooling the liquid is that the the flashing, that is conversion of liquid into vapor in the expansion device, is lower, and lower the flashing, less the velocity of the refrigerant inside the throttling device, and the throttling device will behave better, and it will provide better control over the refrigerant mass flow rate, because the throttling device also works as a control device which governs the mass flow rate of the refrigerant in the system. On one side there is compressor, and on the other side there is throttling device. So these two together balances the forces, and finally governs the mass flow rate in the system. Okay, so subcooling is desirable, and there could be different ways in which one might want to provide subcooling. One of the option is to go for a dedicated subcooler. And that has been explained with the help of this diagram. Here you can see the compressor, and this is the superheated vapor which is entering into the condenser. Now here an example of a water cooled condenser is given. In practical 1, the air cooled condenser has been shown to you, right? So there you are taking the atmospheric air and it is blown over the surface of the heat exchanger, which is a condenser inside which there is condensation of liquid. But here the condenser is water cooled. In the next experiment, we will talk about a water chilling plant where the condenser is a shell and tube type of heat exchanger. You already know about a shell and tube type of heat exchanger as studied in the subject of heat and mass transfer. So it's a shell and tube type of heat exchanger, and water is passed through the tube side of that heat exchanger, and the condensation of the refrigerant occurs over the surface of those tubes, and the refrigerant is on the shell side. So such a water cooled condenser can also be used. Only thing is that in this case you will need some additional devices. When you are taking air from the atmosphere, what you need is just a fan, right? But when you talk about a water cooled condenser, you need a pump, but you cannot just throw away water. Like you cannot use it once through kind of thing. That is, you take tap water and you cool the condenser with the help of that, and then you just drain it. That is not feasible, right? So you have to recirculate it. So you need to have a cooling tower. So many such things will be demonstrated or shown to you in the next experiment on the water chilling plant. So here the cooling media is water and not air, which is flowing in a closed loop, but not all component of that are shown in this. So it's more common to go for or to achieve subcooling when the condenser is water cooled. There could be some, like there is always pros and cons of using different kind of systems, and then finally for your given set of conditions, whichever is better, you have to choose that. In case of water cooled condenser, it is generally like water that is available to you for cooling the condenser would be at a lower temperature, not just because the tap water temperature could be lower than the ambient temperature, but it's cooled in the cooling tower, and finally when it comes out of the cooling tower, its temperature could be less than the ambient air temperature, because there the limit is the wet bulb temperature and not the dry bulb temperature, as you will understand those terms in air conditioning. So here a water cooled condenser is used. So this is for the refrigerant, superheated refrigerant entering into the water cooled condenser, and then it is coming out from this bottom, and there is a dedicated liquid subcooler provided. So that is an additional heat exchanger that is provided. It's possible that the subcooling may occur in the condenser itself. Okay, in the condenser itself, as you have already noticed in the first practical, that because of favorable ambient conditions, the refrigerant is coming out subcooled when it comes out of the condenser. But there may be provision for a separate subcooler also. Now, this you achieved there, and it was around 6 degrees in first practical that we carried out. But if the ambient conditions are not as favorable, it may not be feasible, or it may not be, you may not get such a high degree of the sensible cooling in the condenser in summer when you run it. Okay. So you may use a separate liquid subcooler in some of the systems, right? So there, as you can see, the refrigerant coming out of the condenser is passed through the liquid subcooler, right? So there will be subcooling, and then it goes towards the throttling device. Now, how are you going to use means how are you going to provide cooling in the subcooler? As you can see here, this is a water cooled condenser, and the water from cooling tower, as you can see, is used, and that provides condensation or provides cooling for condensation, and then it comes out from here, and then you pump it back to cooling tower, right? You pump it back to cooling tower. So there is a cooling tower which is not shown, and the water is flowing in closed circuit in that. Now here, as it is shown, what you are doing is you are taking some part of that cooling water, the water that is coming out of the cooling tower, and you are providing it to the liquid subcooler, and then it provides subcooling to the refrigerant there, and then you again mix it back to this return line, and then it goes to the cooling tower. So as you can see, the liquid subcooler and the water cooled condenser, they are in parallel for the water circuit. That is, some part of water goes directly to the condenser, and a smaller part would go to the liquid subcooler, because the heat rejected here is much larger than the heat that you will reject here, because condensation is the, because of high latent heat of vaporization, it's going to be much higher than the heat that will be removed in the subcooler. So some part of water is diverted to subcooler and comes out of the subcooler, providing subcooling to the refrigerant, and remaining part is going to the condenser, water cooled condenser, comes out of that, you mix this stream into that, and again put it back into the cooling tower. So here you are providing a separate subcooler. The reason for providing a separate subcooler, let's say somebody may say that why not to increase the area of the condenser itself, and why a separate component like a subcooler, right? So logically what you can think is that the heat exchanger design here could be different than the heat exchanger design here, because here you have the refrigerant which is condensing, right? And here you have a liquid refrigerant, right? So the design could be different, and because of that you might want to design a dedicated subcooler rather than just providing some larger area in the condenser. I'm not saying that it may not be done. Even that can be done. That is, you provide a little extra area in the condenser so that there is there is some degree of subcooling that is achieved, right? So it's up to the designer to take a call whether it is good to have a separate subcooler or increasing the area of the condenser to achieve subcooling. Okay. Now, as you can see here, and as I mentioned, the for water, these two components are in parallel to each other. Okay. It may be possible that you put them in series. That is, what you do is you first put that water in the condenser, whatever is coming out of the condenser. After that, you put the liquid subcooler, or it can be the other way. That is, you first provide subcooling in the subcooler, and then you put it in the condenser, and then it goes to the cooling tower. So they may be put in series, but generally that configuration is not favorable, because if you if you provide subcooling here, the water temperature will slightly increase, and that will increase the condensing temperature. That will increase the condensing temperature. So that may not be advisable, and putting them in series may be more advisable, right? So there is subcooling provided, and then subcooled liquid goes to the control device or the expansion device, and then you have this evaporator, and the evaporation occurs. Saturated vapor or supernatant vapor may enter into the condenser. So this is one scheme. This is just for demonstration. One scheme for providing subcooling So we will have a lot of time in while we discuss about the practical about the application of a water chilling plant, right? So at that time I will discuss that. Okay, so here our focus is on talking about the subcooling, how we can achieve it. So this is just one example given how one can achieve subcooling. Okay, and now you already have the required understanding for this chart that how subcooling could be beneficial, right? Okay. Now, the other way one can achieve the subcooling. So in previous case, the subcooling was achieved with some external media, that is water. Now, you may not be using a water cooled condenser. You may be using an air cooled condenser. The other way you can achieve subcooling is superheating the vapor coming out of the evaporator. So the liquid that is coming out of the condenser, I'll go to the diagram. The liquid that is coming out of the condenser, it is, as it is written here, it is warm liquid. So it will be if it is an air cooled condenser, then obviously the liquid coming out of the condenser will be at a temperature slightly higher than the ambient temperature. Now this liquid can be subcooled in this heat exchanger, which we will call liquid suction heat exchanger. The reason is that on one side there is liquid refrigerant, and on the other side there is suction vapor, that is the vapor which is entering to the suction side of the compressor. So here there is subcooling provided. How is the subcooling provided? It is provided by superheating the vapor coming from the evaporator. Superheating the vapor coming from the evaporator. Now the evaporator, let's say it is working at minus 10 degrees Celsius, and this warm liquid, let's say ambient is at 30 and this warm liquid is at 35. So this warm liquid is at 35 degrees Celsius and the vapor coming out of the evaporator, let's say there is some degree of superheating in the evaporator. So let's say minus 10 to minus 5 degrees Celsius. So you have the vapor available at minus 5 here. Let's say its temperature increases from minus 5 to 5 degrees Celsius. So there is a increase in temperature from minus 5 to 10 degrees Celsius temperature rise occurs across this heat exchanger. And because of that, this warm liquid gets cooled from, let's say, 35 to it may not be exactly 10 degrees, because the specific heat of vapor and specific heat of liquid could be different, right? So let's say there is a 7-degree drop of this. So it came out at let's say 35, and it gets cooled up to, let's say, 28 degrees Celsius. So there is a 7 degree of subcooling, and then it goes to the expansion valve, and you have achieved subcooling. So when it comes out of the expansion valve, the dryness fraction would be lower, and that will be beneficial for the cycle as well as for the functioning of the expansion valve. Now, whether you will be able to increase COP this way or not, to decide or to understand that, you have to plot it on the required chart. So this has been plotted on the TS diagram, as you can see. So it is coming out, it was earlier without a liquid suction heat exchanger, it would come out at 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and 1. Now, because you are putting this heat exchanger, what is happening is there is superheating of vapor which enters into the compressor. So before it enters into the compressor, it gets superheated because of the heat gain from the liquid on the other side. So the temperature, as you can see, increases from 1 to 1 dash. Now here again, it's assumed that there is no pressure drop in the heat exchanger, which is not the fact, but just to simplify the analysis, it has been shown like that. Of course, there may not be a very significant pressure drop. So it might be okay to assume that it occurs at constant pressure. So now, because of this superheating, the compression process is shifted from 1 to 1 dash 2 dash. So the vapor which will come out of the compressor will be at a higher temperature, and there will be more de-superheating here. So obviously you will need a bit larger size of condenser, and the temperature here also will be higher. And so this is delta W, that is the rise in compressor work. You already know that when you increase the superheating, the compressor work increases. That has been demonstrated with the help of this chart. So there is an additional work required to be done by the compressor. But earlier you came out at 0.3. When you come out of the condenser, okay, when you come out of the condenser here, it is 3. But then there is some subcooling. 3 dash is the subcooling. So temperature drop. Again, assuming that the pressure is same. So now you have achieved temperature drop from 3 to 3 dash. So earlier the expansion process was 3 4, but now it is 3 dash 4 dash, right? So because of that you have produced some additional cooling. Now from this graph you see that the compressor work area seems to be more than the area of this delta Q, that is additional cooling effect produced. But this graph is actually just a qualitative graph. It doesn't give you the area that you get. It is just a representative thing, right? So from this graph you cannot say whether delta W is higher or delta Q is higher. It can be either way. So it depends upon the type of refrigerants and the parameters in which you operate it. So from thermodynamics, if you see that the putting this liquid suction heat exchanger provides you higher COP, because the numerator also increases and the denominator also increases, right? The numerator Q plus delta Q, additional cooling produced, and denominator W plus delta W, additional work provided by the compress or to be done by the compressor. So you cannot just like that, you cannot tell whether COP will increase or decrease. It may be different in different cases. So before you put the heat exchanger, you should do the required analysis and check whether it is going to give you higher COP or not. If it is giving you higher COP, again, you cannot go to a very high degree of superheating and to provide subcooling. So beyond some point, it may be may not be a good idea, and it may be again decreasing the COP. So you have to decide up to what extent you want to go for this. That is subcooling with the help of superheating of evaporator vapor and vapor coming out of the evaporator. And if you see that the COP is increasing, then you can definitely go for that. But of course, there is an additional investment in putting up a heat exchanger, as well as in this process it is shown that there is no pressure drop, but in actual there is going to be some pressure drop. So you might have to consider that fact also, that there is going to be some pressure drop which will increase the compressor work further than just this what is shown here. Okay, but then even if there is sometimes there is a little drop in COP, which is probably not very significant, but the quality of the vapor that you get at the outlet is better, and that's also good for better functioning of the system. So you may sacrifice the COP a little bit, and you may still go for subcooling, which helps you get more liquid in the evaporator and as well as less flashing in your expansion device. So this is about the liquid suction heat exchanger. So that is another way one can achieve subcooling. Now let us talk about the final thing, and that is the pressure drop in actual systems. So there is going to be pressure drop in actual systems as it is explained here in this point A and point B. So pressure drop in evaporator, suction line and compressor suction valve. So these things are on the suction side of the compressor. So evaporator is a heat exchanger, right? And the refrigerant, let's say it flows through the tubes, but still it like there is a finite velocity. Again, in the later part of the evaporator, there is more and more of vapor. So the velocity also will increase. Of course, you may provide more number of tubes for in parallel for the vapor to flow, but still there is going to be finite pressure drop in the evaporator. Then in the suction line, that is the line joining the evaporator and the compressor. So sometimes that line may be very long. If your condensing unit, your compressor and the condenser, if they are very much away from your refrigerated space or the cooled space, at that time, for example, let's say in case of window AC, they are very close. The compressor and the evaporator are very close to each other, but in case of split AC, they are not very close to each other, right? So the suction line, longer the suction line, more the pressure drop in the suction line. And the compressor suction valve, right? So valve has a narrow area, valve opening is very narrow and the vapor has to pass through that, and there is a finite drop of pressure when it passes through that valve. So because of all these reasons, the pressure that we show, what we measured, let's say in the practical one, is just the suction pressure, right? So that is actually after the evaporator. But if you are able to measure the pressure, say just before the evaporator, it should be little higher than the suction pressure that you measured. So because of the drop in pressures, your delta P across the compressor is going to increase, and obviously compressor has to do more work to overcome higher pressure differential because of the pressure drops occurring in evaporator, suction line and compressor suction valve. Then next thing is on the discharge side of the compressor, high pressure side. So the vapor coming out of the compressor has to pass through the discharge valve, again narrow opening. So there is going to be some pressure drop there. Inside the condenser, again condenser is a heat exchanger. Let's say the refrigerant passes through tubes. So it's also, there is also going to be some pressure drop there. And the liquid line, that is from condenser to the throttling device. Now this throttling device is most of the times put very close to evaporator. So we generally don't talk about the pressure drop from after throttling device and before the evaporator, right? Because the throttling device is put very close to the evaporator. Like again, if you recall in the practical one, the inside things of the box, the cooling box. So there, if you have noticed, the capillary tube is very close to the evaporator. But there is a finite distance between condenser and the expansion device, which is called liquid line, and there is a little pressure drop there. Though here it is liquid, so you can expect somewhat lower pressure drop there, but obviously it will not be zero. So because of this, what happens is your compressor has to develop more pressure to overcome all these pressures. At the discharge of the compressor, you have to increase the pressure so that the pressure drop in all these components is compensated. Right? So because of that, now finally your compressor is working across higher delta P, higher P2 upon P1. So the compressor work is going to increase for the same cooling effect that you produce. And because of this, what you find from the ideal cycle, the actual cycle, you can expect that the COP will be little lower than that. And if there is pressure drop in liquid line, it will be responsible for more flashing in the expansion device and higher erosion of parts and poor control. Good design of component requires that all of above pressure drops are kept to practically minimum values. Right? And here the pressure drop occurring in the cycle is shown in a simplified way. So what you are showing is your standard cycle is shown by this dashed line. Okay, all idealized things, but in the actual cycle, as you can see in the evaporator, this is your pH diagram, right? Pressure enthalpy diagram. So as you can see in the evaporator, this line is slanting. It is going down, and it means that there is pressure drop in the evaporator. And you are also showing that there is some superheating before it enters into the compressor. Then this is what is happening in the compressor. You have to go to somewhat higher pressure than this pressure in the saturation cycle or ideal cycle or standard cycle. And so superheating is also more at point 2. And then this line is also slanting downward because of the pressure drop in the condenser. And then either in the condenser or outside the condenser, there is some subcooling that you achieve, and you go up to 0.3, and then you expand it on pH diagram. That expansion process, isenthalpic process, is a vertical line. So this is the line 3, 4, a vertical line. So in a simplified way, you've shown the effect of the pressure drops, and obviously you can see that your area has inside the cycle has increased, and because of that you are doing more work, or that is about the TS diagram. But in case of pH diagram, because you have increased delta H across 1 2, right, delta H across 1 2, and you may or may not have increased the the cooling provided here in process 4.1, because this superheating may occur even outside the evaporator, then it is of no use for COP, increasing the COP, right? So the actual cycle will generally provide you less COP as compared to the theoretical cycle. So this is about the pressure drops occurring in the system. Okay. Now, whatever we did is first law analysis, particularly the example that was solved. Mainly everything was about finding delta H and doing the energy balance and finding COP. So COP is also related to the first law of this thermodynamics, right? Now, like you can do one exercise about this R134A, the example that we solved, and there was no liquid suction heat exchanger used. So that was to be plotted on the pH chart, but it was a saturation cycle or the standard cycle. The vapor that will, the liquid that will come out of the condenser, if you recall the number, it would be at 39.39 degrees Celsius temperature, because that is the saturation temperature, right? And after that, it will be the expansion device will be used, or the throttling device will be used, and it will isenthalpically expand, or pressure will drop up to the evaporator temperature, which was minus 20 degrees Celsius. Now, in the same example, let's say you don't want to use tables now. You can do some quick analysis with the help of the pH chart. What you might do is you go for subcooling, right? You go for subcooling, and yeah, so probably I can go to that chart. So this is as per the standard cycle. Now what you do is, here the temperature is 39 or almost 40, 39.39, as you can also read from here, right? Now you don't stop here, but you extend this line up to this 30-degree line. This is 30-degree line. This is 30-degree line, right? So you go up to horizontal line up to this point, and then you draw a vertical line. Then you draw a vertical line, and then your evaporation starts, right? So your length of this process, the evaporation inside the saturation dome has increased. That is one thing. And there is some, like, the you are providing little more cooling, so obviously more heat rejection in the condenser. Okay, but let's say this has not been achieved by rejecting heat to external media, but there is internal heat exchange here. So whatever is the delta H here, by drawing that extra horizontal line, whatever is the delta H, how will you get delta H? Delta H is here on the enthalpy axis, right? So that delta H, you have to extend this line so that you get the same delta H. So whatever is the heat lost here, the same amount of heat is absorbed here, and now there is superheating. Now there is superheating. So your point 1 will shift to, let's say, 1 dash, because of that extra delta H that you provide here. And now you can again, like, the isentropic assumption will still hold, and you can draw an isentropic line and then connect it with this horizontal line. So you can modify this cycle on this chart, and you get you get some additional. Now you have to keep one thing in mind, that you are going to get some extra delta H here in evaporation process, right? Because you are going for subcooling. So this length of this line will increase. So your cooling effect will increase, but take the portion only inside this saturation dome. Don't take this delta H that you extend here. Okay. Can somebody tell me the reason? Can you post your answer why this delta H should not be included? Yeah, like, you are not going to add delta H here as well as delta H here for calculating the cooling effect. You will take only one of them, right? You will take only one of them. Okay. And the reason for that would be, the reason for that okay, so let me tell you the reason. And the reason is that here you are superheating vapor, but that vapor is not providing you any cooling in the refrigerated space. It is just used to cool this liquid. It is just used to cool this liquid, right? So the additional cooling that is provided is here when you have more liquid to evaporate, right? So the length of this line inside the saturation dome increases, so surely you are getting more cooling effect, right? But this delta H is not to be taken into account for calculating the cooling effect. But when you draw that compressor line now, the isentropic compression as with the assumption, you will see that your delta H in this case and delta H in the new case would be different. Delta H in the new case will be different and would be higher than the previous one. And now you can write down what is the new delta, what is the new QC, cooling effect, and new W, the compressor work. And based on that, you can comment whether the COP has improved or not, right? So I would expect you to do this exercise. You may do it only on the pH chart, right? And try to use as good judgment as you can in the chart, and tell me what happens to COP when you go for liquid suction heat exchanger in this case, right? And then you can provide me the solution or the final answer, the change in COP, and along with the new cycle drawn on the pH diagram. So this is about the first law analysis of vapor compression refrigeration cycle. Now regarding the second law analysis of the vapor compression refrigeration cycle. In thermal sciences and as well as refrigeration air conditioning, in a way being part of that, the second law analysis is getting more and more importance. I think you won't get this topic in any of the book except the HVAC handbook, ASHRAE handbook, right? ASHRAE handbook fundamentals, not HVAC handbook, ASHRAE fundamentals handbook. So the second law analysis is provided, and second law analysis provides insight into the processes and the cycle and helps you to understand where is the highest entropy generation. And higher entropy generation means that component is not working as expected, or is not working very efficiently. And you can focus upon that component, improving that component, and reduce the entropy generation in that component. And for that, the second law analysis is important, right? So though the first law can evaluate the performance of the system, it hardly helps to find ways of improving the performance, right? You may find that COP is low or COP is high, but how to improve it? So the second law analysis can help you in that. The second law of thermodynamics introduces the concept of irreversibility. Higher the entropy generation in a component or cycle, poor the performance. The reasons for irreversibilities, as you know from the knowledge of thermodynamics, entropy generation in system are 1. Pressure drops, 2. Mechanical friction, so that will all occur in almost all components. Non-equilibrium compression and expansion, so that is going to happen in all fast moving machines. And heat transfer with finite temperature difference. So when we talk about the ideal things, what we assume is that like the body which is rejecting heat and the working media, both of them are at the same temperature, but that's away from the reality. And unless there is a finite temperature difference, that the heat transfer is not possible, obviously. But of course, from point of view of second law, you should keep that difference as less as possible to reduce the irreversibilities, right? From point of view of heat exchanger, if you keep less temperature difference, then the size of the heat exchanger will increase. So the two things may be giving you opposite things, and you need to have something optimum which balances. The second law of thermodynamics, second law analysis of VCR system would point out the components with high entropy generation which can be targeted for improvement in performance. Okay. So what is the entropy change in a closed system undergoing an infinitesimal reversible process? So that's given by ds is equal to dq by t. It's an infinitesimal process. It means that there is like during that there is no temperature change. It has occurred at a particular temperature, and there is a change of or exchange of heat between system and the surroundings, which is equal to dq. So ds will be equal to dq by t, while the entropy change of an open system undergoing a finite process may be written as, so there is a change in state of the system. So final entropy SF. So when we write capital letters, it is the total, and when we write small letters, it is per kilogram. So intensive and extensive property. So SF minus SI, final and initial, the difference between the two in the system is given by this equation, right? Again, this is from the knowledge of thermodynamics. That is, you have to integrate dq by t or delta q by t over that reversible process, and this is an open system, so the heat is crossing the boundary, but also the mass is crossing the boundary. So along with the mass, there is some entropy carried into the system, and there is some entropy which is taken out of the system along with the mass. But if it is a irreversible process, then there will be some entropy generation also, that is equal to I, right? The entropy generation during that process. Now, if you are talking about a steady flow, steady state system, the mass, now here you are writing sigma, that is summation, because there could be multiple entries and multiple exits, right? So if there is only one entry and one exit, you may just write ms in and ms out, right? If there is only one stream. Now, again, ms in may not be equal to ms out. Because the fluid leaving may not have specific entropy equal at the inlet and outlet, and second, the mass flow rate, there could be accumulation of mass also. But when you talk about a steady flow, steady state system, there is no accumulation of mass. So the mass flow rate entering into the system is same as the mass flow rate leaving the system. But of course, the value of the entropy, specific entropy, may not be same at entry and exit. Mass flow rate at entry and exit are equal and do not change with time. The properties of the system also do not change with time, right? So here you talked about the change in entropy from between final state and initial state, but actually the state is not changing. Steady state means state is not changing. So this left hand side would also be equal to 0 in case of steady state system, and this is giving you over a finite period of time, but you are talking about the rates when you talk about the steady flow, steady state system. So the same equation is presented for steady state, steady flow system. And this I, say you are taking all other things on the left hand side, this has already become 0. And your delta Q upon T, now it is a rate. So Q dot upon T, the temperature at which the heat exchange occurs, the temperature of the surroundings, right? So Q dot upon T surroundings, and this ms out minus ms in. Now you can see that it is written as m dot, right? M dot, the mass flow rate. It is same as at the entry as well as at the exit. So with this equation, you can find the rate of entropy generation in a given component. So in the next exercise and the example, we'll be talking about one particular system. It is actually an air conditioning system, very similar to, again, the system that you studied in first practical. And in that, we will do the second law analysis of each component. And this equation would be used. You will need certain parameters. You will find out finally the I dot. And you will be able to show that your reverse Carnot cycle COP is high and actual COP of the cycle is low, and the difference is due to the entropy generation in the system. So that is what will be explained with the help of the next example that we will be taking, and that system is very similar to what you have studied in the practical. So you can see this system, all right, and I'll describe that system and also explain you about the data provided and what is to be found, right? So this is the system. So very, as I told, very similar to what you saw in the first practical. So here, let's say this is refrigerated room, or you can say air conditioned room, and there is a direct expansion evaporator. You need to have will have an evaporator fan which recirculates the room air and reduces the enthalpy of the air. You will here it's written thermostatic expansion valve. You had a capillary tube in the system, actual system demonstrated to you. You had an air-cooled condenser and a condenser fan, right? And the liquid and coming out of that and going towards this. And then you also had a reciprocating compressor. This is the line which is joining the evaporator and the reciprocating compressor, which is suction line. And then you have a discharge line between the compressor and the condenser, and multiple states are shown. You can see that 7 states are shown. Otherwise, in ideal cycle, we only show 4 states, right? But here 7 states are given, and you will be able to find different things, the parameters at all these points. And with the help of that, you will be able to show what is the irreversibility rate in each component and how it reduces the COP of the given system as compared to a reverse Carnot cycle system. Okay, so we'll do that in the next class.